Hey, it's the last passive AD Fnatic Upset, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
By the way, one thing I want to get you to clarify now in the interview, just so there's no confusion, because I notice it has confused people who make the wikis for esports, is it looks like, Peter, when they do the wikis for teams, they just list whoever goes on stage and does the draft of the thing as the coach, right? So if people will notice, technically it claims on these wikis that you only coached like season 8 Splyce, but not season 9, and then in Mad Lions, obviously Makovic becomes a goal. As far as I know, what you're basically doing is, I mean, this actually was done by Youngbuck in Fnatic. It's more like essentially they did the Korean system where they had Dylan Falco was like the strategic coach and then Youngbuck was the head coach, Korean style. And as far as I know, you did this in Splyce and Mad Lions, right? The first year's you, and then you bring like sort of your guy gets the official titles coach, but you're the head coach. Am I correct effectively there?
Yes, but I mean, like for what I think Western fans appreciate the most, I'm basically like the way. So in the West, we have such a poor understanding of what a coach is actually what a coach actually brings to a team. But I would say that yes, I was the head coach on those teams, and even though I wasn't on stage in 2022 for EG, I was the head coach on EG, right? But how does this work? What's the difference? For people who studied kind of Eastern teams, you normally have a head coach and you have a strategic coach, and the strategic coach is on stage. And what does the head coach do? The head coach, he provides input in scrims. He provides a mentorship to the coaches. He goes and resolves conflicts. He even does a bit of coaching himself. But a really good head coach is never going to undermine their strategic coach, right? Like, let's say that Mac was head coaching and he did something which I disagreed with. Did this ever happen with Mac? I don't think it ever happened with Mac, but it did happen with Duke once or twice. I'm never going to call Duke out in front of the players, right? I'm going to go and talk to him after scrims, and I'm going to be, you did this and this and this. I thought, you should think about it in this way. And then you have like a really, really frank discussion about this kind of thing. And that's kind of done always behind closed doors. But I think that, the problem is that normally the people that get moved to the head coach role are people that have been strategic coaches in the past, right? So they understand what it's like to be a strategic coach. But there's so few people that have been strategic coaches that didn't either move to senior management, so a GM role or something like this, or who retired from esports, or who just want to remain strategic coaches forever. Then nobody really goes into kind of this head coach role. And this head coach role, I think, is really, really important because part of it is kind of bringing leadership into the team. And this is something where, what's an example I can think of this? EDG. So there's a very famous EDG VOD where Kendra is like yelling at his players after a defeat, right? Sure. And like the thing that most fans, they watch a video and they think, holy shit, this Eastern coach here is like flaming the shit out of his players. Why don't Western coaches do this? You should just flame the shit out of your players. And they don't understand that as soon as that guy leaves the room, either the veteran on the team or like somebody from the coaching staff or somebody who's providing a leadership responsibility is going and checking if everyone's okay. They're not like softly going and doing it, right? But they're going and saying, they're there to, it's supporting what the coach has said, but they're being the good cop to kind of the bad cop.
They're like the release valve for the pressure of what he's just built up with all the drama, right?
Exactly, right?
Okay.
Right? And the interesting thing for me from the EDG documentary is there's one where he's talking to Flandre. Flandre is they've come from the same team together. And Flandre's just had a really bad day where he's acting unprofessionally. And he goes and says to Flandre, you're acting like Flandre like storms out of the room or something. And he's gone and said, he goes to finds Flandre and he goes and says, you do like, you're going to go back into that room and I'm going to yell at you. I'm going to yell at you in front of the team. And you have to understand, you know I like you. You know that I respect you. You know that I think you're a good player, but I can't let this stand. Right? And the implication being, we've come from the same team. I can't let you behave in this way or else.
And then like he goes back into the room or something, right?
Yeah, exactly. And he goes back into the room and he yells at this guy, right? Who he's just talked. And to me, that was the okay. So I knew it was happening. Yeah, but it wasn't. But that was the thing. That was the interesting thing that I was wondering. Why did no more people not focus on this? And why are they just looking at him just yelling? No, the point is not that he's yelling. The point is about why he's yelling. What's the purpose of the yelling? And what's happening after the yelling has happened. And yeah, so I would say that this is one thing. It's about kind of constructing you have to have the right kind of team environment where where those kind of actions become okay. And I think that's kind of what that's what you kind of provide as a head coach, right? You are there to supplement your strategic coach. But if your strategic coach wants to go and yell at your players, right, which I don't recommend, but if that's something you want to do, then who's going to turn around to them afterwards and be like, are you guys okay? Like, what do you think about this, right? Do you think that this is good? And you're never undermining that guy, right? Like, you can't undermine your strategic coach, right? Like, then the entire team collapses because then your coaching staff is split, and then everyone, it's very easy to like find, divide, and then the whole team goes into factions and collapses, right? But you have to be there to supplement what they want to do, but you have to understand them, and you have to like supplement and support what they're doing whilst also acting as a release valve, right? You have to be somebody who's saying you went too far, right? Because if I'm the head coach, is my assistant, and I'm leading scrims and I'm going on stage, is my assistant coach going to come and say that to me? Right?
Very
Like
unlikely,
my assistant coach, yeah, I mean, he's not going to come and say that to me, right? So this is why you tend to have, even though they're not doing the predominant work of what we would consider a head coach in the West, right? This is why the head coach role is so important. The head coach role is the kind of the release valve. It's the kind of person who pays attention to the atmosphere of the team, and who's responsible for bringing in like the kind of the bigger picture. But the problem is that you don't have people. I mean, Young Buck did it well, right? But I'm just trying to think like of other coaches in the West. There's very few who chose to move up into that role. And yeah, that's what I would say on that. I would say also that generally, the coaches that like the players that I've worked with, not all of them like me, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later. But generally, the coaches that I work with have all had very good things to say. And why is that? It's because of being able to facilitate them and help them achieve what they want to achieve, right? Both in terms of how they want to run their team, but also kind of helping them improve and become the best coaches that they possibly can become, right, in their skill set, mentorship and that kind of thing, opening them up to new ideas. So I'd say that's kind of what I was providing in those roles, and I'd say that's kind of what the role is.
By the way, that's actually why, to bring it all the way back, when you say that like people have a very strange idea of what a coach does, I notice even coaches fall for it though, dude, because I've even said the same things. Like when people like Youngbuck get flamed in the years when people think they're trash when they're an XL, they'll always try and like win the fans' validation like you're talking about by being like, look at this draft I did. And I always tell them like, bro, that's not the impressive thing. Like, if you want to tell them so, tell them like the stories of what you did in Fnatic when like everyone knows the behind the scenes, by the way, like when the whole boot camp was all melted down. That's the story, mate. That's what you were coaching. That's what you killed it. You were in the world's finals. So like to take that point and spin it, you mentioned him there. So as I said, in the setup, next year in season 9, you were the head coach, but obviously Duke was listed as the coach as well, right? And people might know this is when he started to come on my shows, etc. Now, what's funny is I really do want to know your take on this particular coach, because even if people don't know, Mac is much more akin to your like manner, like demeanor, etc. If people don't know Duke, like it's funny he actually agreed to come on my shows because he's one of those people where he's really stubborn. He was just arguing all the time, basically. And it's like he's one of those guys as well I know as a coach where like he hates that thing of like where even though as an analyst on a show, all you can do is speculate. If you speculate about something in his team and he knows you don't know exactly, I get mega mad about it. So I actually wonder, how did this dynamic work? This like I can certainly see how Peter Dunn and Mac get along, but like what was the dynamic with Duke and Peter Dunn in this? Because he has very strong opinions about what he thinks, right?
Duke has very strong opinions for sure on how he thinks. I think that this is something we should talk about Odo as well in a bit, but like this Duke in 2019 is very different from Duke in 2023. And I think it's really important when I talk about Duke that we recognize that I'm just talking about Duke in 2019 and maybe 2018, 2017, right? But Duke in 2019 is the type of coach that he's incredibly intellectually smart. He graduated with like first from one of the top universities in Paris. He's like, I mean, if he wanted to go and be a lawyer or something, he could probably be making tons being a lawyer, or whatever he wants to do. But he's chosen to be in esports. And he puts in a lot of work, but he had very, very. So his expectation was, this is really easy for me to understand. Just go and study it. Go and find out yourself. I'm putting in the work. I'm putting in a ton of work every single week. So why aren't you putting in work to a player, right? And he's. I would say about Duke, he was very, very Smart, very, very good at all types of computer games. He would be like really high ranked on like Total War variants or like
Right.
Civilization or things like this, right? This is what he would do for fun. He'd spend all of the like Slay the Spire and things like this, right? Like he would be amongst the like really, really top players at these kind of things, but very, very strategic mind, chess as well, right? And he expect that from his teammates, and the reason from his players and from the people of his staff. And I would say that 2019 in a sense was one of the best years that I've ever had as a coach, because Mac, Duke and we would just push each other really, really hard on that year. We would always come to the office with new ideas. We would always push each other in to improve our game knowledge, because we had really high expectations of each other, and we tried really hard not to let other people down on the team. But that doesn't always work with players. Like sometimes you need to have somebody who can put an arm around you and explain it in a soft way without like making you feel like an idiot or something like this. And that's what I would say. That's why I would say Duke and Mac was such an insane dynamic. Because Duke would kind of be the bad guy. He would like stand in the review and he would like berate is too strong a word, but he would go like hard. He would go really, really hard in reviews, and then like he would then wander off, and then Mac would go and talk to like Kobbe afterwards, or he'd go and talk to like Humanoid afterwards, and he'd be like, yeah, so what did you think, or something like that. And like they had a really, really good dynamic that played off each other very, very well. But what I would say is that I think Duke, if you put Duke next to somebody who had like a really, really who was more like a player's coach, right? Like I think that he would be at his absolute best.
Like if he was with Yamato Cannon or someone like that, someone where if you vibe with them, right?
Yeah, or Mac is the perfect example, right? Sure. Like him and Mac together were like an insane coaching staff, and I would, and that's what I would say about Duke. I would say that obviously, like that year in 2019, Splyce did really, really well in 2019, but that was not a happy year. That was like it was a really, really, it was a slog at points. And, not everyone, I mean, obviously I can talk about it like this, but, it was Chachi's best year as a player, but he chose to retire at the end of that year, right? Because, he kind of lost his love for the game a bit. And I'll be honest, I lost my love for the game a bit that year as well. But, it came to, like it, I mean, how can I put this in a nice way? Okay, we had a situation we were playing against Unicorns of Love. Oh wait, was it? It was a Unicorns of Love series, and basically after game 1 of that series, one of our players stormed off in the review after game 1, and like I would say that that for the rest of that series, like. Mac and I were doing 1-to-1 with that player, and then the other 4 players were doing the things with Duke. But I would say, I mean, I think there were a lot of tension in the team, but the team did very well. I mean, we got to the quarterfinals of Worlds on a team that most people didn't have as top 6, in the LEC.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say about Duke. What I would say about him is I think he's incredibly smart about the game. I think like if he was coaching like robots, he would be like a top 2 coach in Europe, top 3 coach in Europe, right? Because his game knowledge is really, really on point. And he's very, very rarely wrong about something. And even if he is wrong, you can argue him down rationally. He's not one of those people that's really stubborn, but his expectations are really, really high for players. And I would say that very few people meet his expectations, and I count that for both coaches and for players. That's what I would say about you.
What was the thing you were referencing about Odo Abner? Is there some beef with Odo Abner?
Okay. So basically, 2018 to 2019, because you were talking about roster building philosophy,
yes.
Right? So I said in 2018 that Odo was our best player, right? Because I think I said earlier that I thought Odo was the best player, Kobbe was second, Xerxes and Niski were third, fourth, and Kasing was fifth. But that's because they took his champion pool out of the game, right? They decided you're not allowed to play your champions anymore. But we chose to make a change with Odo Amne into Vizicachi, right? And despite the fact that Odo was the best player on that team. And why was that? It's because the culture fit with Odo was really, really not good on that team.
But
because
it's weird. People might know I'm actually like, I would consider him a friend, like as someone I've known for many years. He's someone where, like, put it this way, I'll use the exact model you just set up. Put it this way, he way prefers the Duke style of coaching to the Mac Peter Dunn one. Like, he actually, people won't know this. He wants to be flamed, and he also wants the players to all flame each other. He's kind of a bit like weird in that sense. It's quite unique. He's very different from like LCS players in that regard, I imagine.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, like, you know, he wanted to go to NA, but or you know, he thought he was going to go to NA. I don't know, but
It would have been terrible for him, wouldn't it? He'd never survive. I'd never survive.
But what I would say, is he was the type of person who he was very, very direct. But the problem with Odo is Odo can never be the number 2 on a team. He is way too charismatic. Like, this is the curse of players that have really high charisma.
Right.
Even if they're better suited to a number 2 role, they can, like, Odo can never be the number 2 on a team. Not because he's really selfish or in like he's a guy, nice guy. He works really, really hard, but he's just far too like he the way that he feels has a knock-on impact for everyone else, right? And he will hold himself back in times where he feels like, if you as a coach tell him you've got to hold it back, like your teammate cannot tolerate what you're telling him right now, he will hold it back, but it's really obvious that he's holding it back, and that like you feel tension because maybe he can explode, even though you know that he's never going to explode, right? And I would say that Odo at this point in his career didn't channel it very well. But obviously, in 2023, this is the thing that frustrates me the most. People think that if you say one thing about a player, they can never change. And Odo, like the Odo that exists now, is not like the Odo that was existing in 2018. He worked out over the 5 years how to channel that into a productive way, to the point where Odo was considered like this perennial choker who like he basically didn't win any play because they kept coming 3rd place, right? Because of regular season placing with H2K, with probably like he was considered that guy. He could never win a playoff series, let alone a title, and he was considered like the biggest choker of chokers, right? I think it was him and Yankos, I think, together. Yeah. And obviously they proved it wrong now, right? But to me, like, Odo has never been, like, to me, I have nothing but respect for Odo, right? But what I would say is that in the 5 years after 2018, he has become like one of the best leaders of a team in Europe, and this is something that Europe has historically lacked. But anyway, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. But the point is that we made the decision to make that swap out, right? And I'm going to be honest, like, Odo and I haven't spoke since then, right? Since 2018, right? And there are times where I have supposed beef with a player, and I'm just like, why the fuck does this guy not like me? I like literally don't understand. But in Odo's case, I like fully understand it. Right? Like, I mean, he was the best player on the team, and we chose to make a swap in a situation where we were bringing in somebody who he considered worse than him, but there was a better culture fit. And yeah, I don't know what to say, right? Like the next season, we did get to the quarterfinals of Worlds, but sometimes those are difficult decisions to make, right? And you know, I understand, is what I would say on that.
I do want to actually also ask about Kobbe, because the question goes like this. As you say, at the time, because he was considered like diet reckless or whatever, yeah, obviously on my shows we were somewhat critical of him because it was like, essentially just pointing out like the team gives you the resources and then you get to the late game and then you can't, yeah, you're an ADC, we know, mate, like that's the joke obviously. But at the time, if people don't know, you obviously in the team clearly did actually have him decided as like, this is going to be the carry of the game, because if people don't know, I remember back then, like the way you even set up the lanes, he would like farm the golems for real just to get ahead early, and then like, and then it was clear like the picks that he had and stuff. Like clearly you did view this guy as a star player, and I actually do think Peter, sadly in his career, he has been somewhat like misunderstood by almost everyone. Like the worst one is the TSM team, where they had him on the same team with Broken Blade, and they were just letting like gank him for top lane all day long, and then they were turning around to Kobbe and going like, you don't seem to be carrying the game. It's like, bro, what's he gonna do? Like, it's got ADC. But the thing is, I'll just say this, Peter, if anyone saw this last year in Astralis, dude, he's a fucking stud. Like a copy of today. It, like, actually can 1v9 a game. Like, the guy's fucking monster. But I got the sense from talking to him, Peter, that like I identified. I think the issue he had when I talked to him is he's way too sort of like self-effacing as a person, like you say. Like he won't actually do what, like, even though they go too far, my boys like fucking Forgive and Will do, which is they do come in and go, hey, I'm the best in this team. Give me this, this, and this. You fucked up like that. Like I was the best. You know, they let themselves be. You know, it sounds like to some degree his problem is he sort of lets people like push him in a box or tell him he's not good or make him believe he's just some average player. Like when he played in your team and he played in the Australis, now I thought he looked mega. So what would you say about this player?
Yeah. I mean, I will say on that TSM, like he did have, like, you have Dardoch and Broken Blade playing zone control for you. Look, I like Dardoch as a player, but they're not insane team fighters,
Yes.
right? Like so he went from having chat. Okay, so what I would say about Kobbe is I think your approach on you know saying that he's self-effacing, I think is as good a way as I could use to describe him. I would say that Kobbe. So there's one thing in AD carries that I care about a lot, right? Which is kind of what I call their switch mechanism in a team fight, which is obviously as an AD carry, you can't die too early in a team fight, but you need to be able to go from playing passively to aggressively at the right moment. And I would say that this is something that Kobbe and Danny both had like really, really obvious signs, right? And it wasn't necessarily, I think when most people look at AD carries, they really look at their 2v2 laning, their ability to snowball from the early game or their ability to play from a lead. But I think Kobbe's biggest advantage is his ability to go insanely aggressive at the most important point in a team fight that kind of swings the momentum of a fight. And I think that when people say it, or Reckless is a better team fighter, I don't think they fully understand, or Reckless was the best team fighter in Europe. I don't think they fully understand what they mean by that. Because what Reckless had as a team fighter is he's really good at playing to his limits, but his switch mechanism is really poor.
Yes.
Right? Like he doesn't like he can flash in, but his understanding of when to flash in is less to the edge. It's not bad, right? It's like 7 out of 10, but it's not like insanely strong. It's not like 10 out of 10, right? Whereas I would say that maybe his ability to play the limits of the fight at the start when he was at his peak was maybe 9.5 out of 10, right? And maybe Kobbe's was like a 9, but Kobbe's switch mechanism was like an 8.5, right? So when I say that Kobbe, I thought Kobbe was the best team fighter in the league, firstly, I think that it was between him and Reckless, but it's because of the things that I'm valuing more. Okay. But what I think the Kobbe's biggest weakness as a player, and the thing that makes him so special now on Australis, and dear God, if he's not in LEC next split, it's like one of the most. It would be absolutely criminal. But it's looking that way. But I mean, it would be insane, right? But the reason why is because generally his wave control back in those days was not the best. So it was very hard to snowball him because normally the best AD carries in the world will think 3 waves ahead, 4 waves ahead, right? And they think about base timers and that kind of thing. And that's something that he kind of improved on when he was on Splyce, in the 2 years that he was on Splyce. But he was never like elite in that regard. But now he's on Australis. I don't know whether it's him improving a lot, whether it's him with Jonghoon. Maybe Jonghoon was doing it. I don't know. But that's kind of what made him kind of take the step up to be from like late game carry Kobbe to like all game carry Kobbe, right? And yeah, that's what I would say about him. And I would say also that he's always willing to sacrifice for the team. And this was a weird thing about that 2018 Splyce, in that every single person on that team was really eager to sacrifice. Like if they had a chance where they could sacrifice, they like in draft or in game or something like this, they would always offer in the game. And I think maybe having somebody more selfish, like on that team, I don't know, people won't remember back in the days, but basically we didn't lose a single game all year on Camille. And Camille top. And why was that? It was because that was the game where we had a really clear game plan, because Odo would be like, I'm on Camille, give me all the resources and I will carry. And then we gave him all the resources because everyone is willing to sacrifice. And
if people don't get the implication there is, like, you can only play champions at that top and be awesome as a carry top if your bot lane is going to be safe and you can guarantee they're not going to fall behind and they don't need the resources, basically, right? Yes.
Yeah, but I think that's the one thing that Kobbe, I think his biggest weakness as a player, because I think that he's one of those players who he would always be willing to sacrifice. He's always be willing to be stable when he could. I felt he was better than a lot of these AD carries in the league, and he could have just stomped them into the floor if he called Niski bot more than he did, right? But he just chose not to, and that's what I would say that I felt I was most frustrated with working with Kobbe. But of all the people that I work with on my 2 years on the Splyce era, like we call things in terms of a 2-year project, right? So like the 2018 to 29 era, Kobbe is the one that I have the most positive memories of. And I think that I just wish that he'd be willing to recognize more how highly other people saw him.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, like, the show that he was on is the perfect example, right? Because I know it was just banter, right? Like, you were just like, oh, you didn't really deserve it, but he just stood there and
the joke is, Peter, if you ever go back and watch these episodes, you can see this is where people don't get my persona at all. That actually makes me uncomfortable when I realise, like, oh, they're not even bantering. Like, by the way, the same thing happened to Kasing. I once had Kasing on a show and basically told him sort of like, why are you so like, you're so underwhelming, and he was sort of like hurt by it, like, oh, okay. And it's like, bloody hell, I was actually trying to almost like banter you to come back at me, like, like I'm saying in that scenario, I want Kobbe to say I'm actually the best, mate. Like, I'm the fucking best ADC in the league. But as you say, he just sort of took it, didn't he? Like, all right.
Yeah, but yeah, that's what I say about Kobbe. I say about Kobbe, really, really good ability to recognize the flow of a team fight, and really, really good switch. Again, I don't know what other people call it, but really good switch mechanism.
Right, here's the thing.
I was really sorry. I was really actually, like, the funny thing is that one of his like dreams was to go and play for TSM, and like, I mean,
that's the ultimate. Be careful what you wish for, right there, mate. What do you want?
I mean, it's such like I have a pretty good understanding of what happened behind the scenes on that TSM split, and holy fuck! Like, I mean, I genuinely wanted the best for Kobbe. Like, there's a world where he just chooses to stay with Splyce, right? And then maybe Carzzy doesn't get promoted. Like, he stays there because obviously, like, he's a world championship quarterfinalist. But like, when he said TSM were coming for him, it was just like, okay, fine, respect,
Yeah.
And then the way TSM treated him was, holy fuck. Okay, anyway, sorry.
It's all good. Here's the thing. Some of these players, like, these are ones everyone loves. They're just universally aiming at Kobbe, Niski. Who doesn't like these guys? Have you got your work cut out for you now, though? Because now I'm going to ask you about Humanoid, who obviously was the player who came in Season 9 in Splyce. Because here's what's weird, Peter, is people forget that he came in, and this was when he was like a rookie, and he was good. Like, obviously, if people don't remember, he came in as part of that famous trio where it was like Nemesis, Humanoid,
Larson.
And Larson, and there was another one as well. Who was the fourth one? Abbedagge, yes. It was these all came from like the RL/the Academy scene, etc. Right? When he came in, people remember back then, the year after with Mad Lions is obviously late. Well, 2 years later is when the championships come with Mark, etc. Right? So the early Humanoid actually was pretty well liked. He was a pretty good player. Like, people thought he was like a pretty strong rookie. And in fact, even in the rookie, I sort of see and heard things that match up with how it is best later people have described him. So I want to get your take on the rookie Humanoid, because people told me things, Peter, like for example, even though, by the way, he gives off this demeanor of like, my joke is he thinks he's like the guy in high school with like a leather jacket and a motorbike, and then everyone's like, whoa, stay away from him, he's dangerous. Like, he does give off a vibe as though he doesn't give a fuck, Peter, as though he's like, nothing gets to him. But I've heard actually he's like a very mentally engaged player, and he does have like a strong sense of what to do in the game, and he actually has quite a high opinion of like what you should do. Give me some sense of him, because he sounds like a very mysterious character, quite frankly.
Yeah. He had very, very strong opinions. I think that there's no player who's called me clueless more times in a shorter period than he
and meant it though, not just bantering, sort of low key meant it. Like, you know what you're talking about.
I mean, like, we would do a lot of 1-to-1s, and like he would tell me a lot of things, right? But like the point is with Humanoid, I would say that he's always somebody who you could argue with in a rational way, right? And he would never accept your point. Like if he disagreed with you, he would never accept your point. But then you would tell him something, and then you would notice in scrims 2 or 3 days later he was doing the thing you told him,
Right.
even though he told you
Right.
at the time that it was. So that's kind of what I would say with Humanoid. It means that a lot of the coaches that have worked with him in the past have like insanely negative things to say about him, right? Like the references we got for him coming into Splyce were horrifically bad, like amongst the worst you can possibly get. Things like this guy is uncoachable, this guy would drag your team, this guy's a team killer, and things like this. And obviously they were concerns, but the big thing is that Mac vouched incredibly hard for him. And for me, there were like it was a close between like Abadage and Humanoid. Larson wasn't an option because Larson could only come later on. So we were debating a lot between Abadage and Humanoid, and I was pretty in the middle between the two, but because Abadage had just had a better split in Turkey because they were both in Turkey at the same time. But Mac was like, this guy has literally everything that I could possibly want in a player. This is the guy like we should sign, and who cares about all of these things? Like we'll make it work. Like look at the guy we're going to bring in, Chachi. Like look at who else you're going to have on this roster. Like this is not a yeah, it's going to be a Chachi Xerxes roster. Chachi Xerxes, so for people who don't know, are quite kind-hearted people. They're like very open. They're willing to share things. They bring the team together. And the thing was, okay, so this is the culture we're going to have. We can handle it if things go bad. But look at this guy's mechanics. You cannot tell me that this guy doesn't have good mechanics. And like his mechanics were undoubtedly like incredible. He's also somebody who studies the game, but he hates. This is the funny thing. So Niski will study the game, and he will bring things to the table that he's seen that he wants you to see as well, and that he thinks everyone else should see as well. Humanoid will study the game, and again, this is 2019, 2020, so maybe he's different now. I don't know what he's like now. But he will study things, but you will never know that he studied them until like 2 weeks later. You were like, oh, I saw this game in LPL, and he'll be like, oh, that was the EDG game, right? Or he'll be like something, and you're like, so you watched that game, so why didn't you bring this to the table? But his knowledge is really, really. His knowledge is always on point, but I would say that he sees things often in black and white. But if you tell him to go and think about things later, he'll come back and he'll sometimes change it. But on the spot, he's always black and white. It's like, this is obvious. Right. You should obviously do this, right? Like, right. And this is the thing he'll say a lot, right? It's like, oh, it's obvious that we should do this thing, when it's not. It's super, super unobvious. Like, I mean, I can see where he's coming from, but like, sure. I'm looking at the mission setup, and it's like, it's not that obvious. But what I would say is Humanoid in his first year in 2019 was kind of growing into the team. I think one of my best stories was about Humanoid was the first game he played against Caps on stage, right? And he was really looking forward to playing against Caps on stage. He was super motivated in his first year. I mean, one criticism that people have had of Humanoid on your shows and otherwise is that he doesn't like the game. He doesn't like the game that much. But maybe the motivation he feels at international competition, maybe in his first year, he was motivated. He was so motivated in the first year because he was in LEC for the first time. He really, really wanted to show a good part of himself. And the first game against Caps, he was like, he's normally a very stoic guy, keeps himself very calm, but he was like fidgety. I've literally only seen him fidgety twice. Once was before the first time he played Faker on stage, and the other time was when he played Caps. And then he played Rise into LeBlanc, and I think he got like a lane advantage or something, and I can't remember even the result of the game. But I think we lost the game, but no, we definitely lost the game. But I remember coming up to him afterwards, and I was asking him, and I remember asking him, oh, how do you see on stage? And he turns to me, and he's like, I thought it would be harder. And then he just, right. And then he just like walks off and doesn't even have any more comments. And like yeah, so I mean, that's what I would say about Humanoid. That's the kind of thing. He's the type of guy who he works he's like one of those students that you have at school that works really, really hard, but wants to like pretend that he's
doesn't want to seem like a try hard, right?
Yeah, he doesn't want to seem like a try hard, you know. Oh, you know, I'm revising for the test, you know, 5 minutes before. Oh, I haven't really done all of this. Oh, but I got 100%. Oh, you know, who would have thought? But I think that's the thing about Humanoid, and also I think that he is somebody who he really cares about his teammates. So in 2020, Arome was going through a really, really rough patch. Like the community was shitting on him.
For sure,
like it was like this was towards the end of towards spring in spring, and Humanoid, like he saw some issues that he was having in laning phase, and he would just talk with him. You know, he would just go and say, "Oh, did you consider these kind of things?" And I'll be honest, because he had this tough guy demeanor, I didn't really recognize this until like one day when I just walked into the practice room, and it was just after scrims, and they were staying late. And, you know, they didn't hear me come in or anything, right? And then I just overheard them talking, and then I was just one of those situations where you open the door, you like hear something, you can't believe what you're hearing, and then you're like, I better not disturb them. You know, you close the door, and then you like hope that they didn't recognize you were there. And that's the kind of thing that I really appreciated with him, because when he was a rookie, he didn't really get to show those things. But in 2020, he was like the leader on the team. He was the big guy.
Right.
And like there were lots of things like, you know, he didn't believe in being in sports psychology. Like he just doesn't think sports psychologists matter.
If people don't know, a lot of people from like his region of the world, because they have such a harsh like reality to life, a lot of them think all that's like nonsense. You know, they think it really is just sitting on a couch paying someone for no reason. And I know it's true.
And like he really didn't want to do it. And I remember this, I think, will summarize Humanoid better than any other story I can say. And we were having a one-to-one, and I said to him, look, it really doesn't, maybe you think it's useless, maybe it is useless for you, like, you know, because it didn't seem to be that useful from talking to the person who was doing the things, but you know that for your teammates, for these teammates, that it really matters for them, and that you are the person that they look up to and that they respect, and if they see you take part in it and give a shit, they will do it, and it will make a massive difference for them. And then he left that one-to-one, went straight into the meeting, and was massively, you know, teacher's pet, like try hard to the end of the world, even though I knew that he thought it wasn't that valuable, because he recognized that's what his teammates needed, and that's who he needed to be. And I would say that from Humanoid, he was sometimes direct. He's never the kind of guy who, you know, you've had a bad day, maybe you've had an argument with your girlfriend. He's never the type of guy who's going to put his arm around you like Niski would, but he's the type of guy who he'd look out for you, right? Like he's like the older brother type, you know, like did you beat up my little brother? Okay, I'm coming for you like next time, you know. And Niski, I would say Niski was the type of guy who would he would like talk you up. He would be really positive, motivational, but like especially with Carzzy, right? Like if enemy bot lane was like stomping on bot lane, he would like for the first game and like making Carzzy's life hard and things like this, he would make sure that enemy bot lane didn't play for the rest of the scrim block, right? Like there would just be days where first scrim didn't matter, second scrim, and then like you could see that they clearly passed the, you know, there was one, I think it was XL, we were scrimming against XL, right? And you know, that Mad Lions team, we were good in scrims, but not insane, but good. But like somebody started shit talking for some reason. I can't remember why they were shit talking, but they started shit talking, and then the rest of the block, like every game was over in 20 minutes. We just like stomped them into the floor, like, and that's what I would say. That's what I would say about Humanoid. Like when he needed something that light the fire under him, and I would say that this is something Carzzy and Humanoid together were just like an insane combination, because Carzzy would like he knew how to get people invested in the tiniest things. Like there is no person that I would see who would shit talk. Like he would, this was like the legendary G2. This was the G2 that had almost won the Golden Road. And every scrim against G2, he would go and like, he would shit talk so much in the scrims, and even on stage that like he would be like 1v2. You know, against like Wonder and Perks, who would be like the big guys on G, and he would always be like, "Oh, you know, some of the things they're not PG-13 things."
Is the idea that he's part of why he's doing it is like then everyone has to try hard. Like we have to now like beat these guys, so shit talk them.
I mean, I don't even know. Maybe that's just who he is.
All right, it's not calculated, right? Okay.
I mean, I don't know, but maybe it's who he is. Maybe he's not. But yeah.
I've got a segue for you because this actually leads into a more abstract principle I want to ask you also about with when it comes to team building, which is the way you described Mac vouching for Humanoid's the perfect example of what I want to talk about, which is when you have these players, Peter, in history who clearly are, by the way, clearly they are talented players. Your eyes tell you that. It's the reason that they're in the scene, like Forgiven, Self-Made, Dardock, these sorts of guys, even Reckless to some degree. People know the stories behind the scenes, right? The thing with these people, Peter, is obviously the talent is so much. Plenty of teams are going to consider them. But actually, the way that Mac explained the Humanoid vouch there, I thought it's a very interesting lens you can apply to this, which is it's not that these guys like they're either toxic or a problem or they're not. It's that they have these certain, let's just say, call them weaknesses. Maybe some of them have a social weakness, or they can only be the carry, or everyone has to listen to them, or they're always right. There's a million ways that you can have a negative sort of like thing manifest, right? But what I would say is this, Peter, is I get my vibe instead is more like the question is, do you have the right kind of team for them to play it? If you do, if you can build a team that makes sense around them, like we're talking about here, because when you gave the example there of the Splyce team, if people don't understand, the reason he went down the players is those are players that aren't going to have a problem with Humanoid being like that. Like Vizicachi's a mega veteran at this point in time. Kobbe, we already said he's like an unselfish player. Like these are actually players where you can have a player like that because he's sort of offset, like the actual balance works. And the reason why I think that's an interesting approach is because if you do build a team that like offsets the weaknesses they have and other people can add that strength, eventually, because their weaknesses aren't manifest or sometimes disappear, then you just get all the strength. So like, for example, as much as people, it sounds, because obviously I'm thinking more the later one, as much as people might think I'm critical of Humanoid, when you explain those stories, now I can see how all the positives would come out, because if you have a team that can handle him, hey, dude, it's brilliant to have your mid laner, star player, actually think he's the best and think he's better than Caps and think we're going to win. And also, by the way, even like you're saying, that's actually even quite a cool angle, the idea that like essentially it's sort of like he won't let people beat up on the other teammates. I bet that actually bonds them to him as well and makes them think, hey, someone not looking out for me. So you can see how what were negatives before can flip into positives if you sort of make the right environment, right?
But it's also about how you channel that, because there's certain players, like there's different levels of toxicity, right? There's like destructive toxicity and there's like almost constructive. Like constructive is kind of the wrong. It's like, why are you toxic? Are you toxic because like you disrespect people, or are you toxic because you're frustrated that you can't get your point of view across?
Yes.
Right? Or like, how much do you care? Do you give a shit about other people, right? And that's what I would say. Like the way that the references that I got were basically, this guy is completely destructive, toxic. This guy is like the type of guy who would destroy your team. But this is not what Max saw, right? And I'll like the Mac's biggest argument in favor of Humanoid, besides obviously this guy is obviously the best, right? This is because we want really aggressive players who will play their limit. This guy obviously has that. But it was like, this guy isn't like, this isn't the full story, right? This is the way Mac argued it, right? In this like there's something here that you aren't seeing from the references you're getting, right? But there's something that I know and I will vouch for. So that's what I would say. That's what I would say for him. Yeah, I would say also that team was a team that also respected him and acknowledged like he was the alpha male on that team. Like there's no question that he was the guy. And you know, I think a lot of his teammates on that team like have nothing but respect. Like you go and talk to even people like Shadow, Rome, Kaiser, Carzzy, you go and ask them about Humanoid in 2020, they will have nothing negative to say about him. And I think that's no coincidence, because he did a lot. He did a lot for that team, and you know, he in a sense he kind of acted as an extra coach as well on that team.
I mean, if people don't remember, a lot of them were rookies to LEC level, obviously. Yeah. So he was the veteran in this team, right?
Yeah, he was a second-year player behaving like a 10-year veteran, like a 7-year veteran or something. You know, like in his sports terms, and it was really, really impressive to see. And it doesn't surprise me that he won the titles with Mad Lions next year, because I will be honest with you, the thing that Europe lacks more than any other region is leadership.
Right.
In terms of players, right? And this is maybe if we talk about Heretics later, we can talk a bit about leadership. But the best leader in Europe was Perks.
Yes.
And where was Perks in 2021? He was on Cloud9.
Yes.
And so that's, I think, the big advantage that Mad Lions had. They had somebody who was like a natural born leader who could who could make the game about him, who could make the team about him, and who could function in a way that would lift up his teammates in a positive way. And I think that's the big advantage Mad Lions had. But obviously the players that he was playing with had an impact on that as well, and the fact that they allowed him to fulfill that role was maybe also a motivator for him, right? Because you're in a leadership responsibility. Sure, you get the kudos, but you also have additional responsibility. And I think that's something that Mac is very good at doing. He's very good at giving players additional responsibility but more particularly players that, because of the way they behave, other coaches might try to control them, might try to put more limits on them, try to like force them into a model. He's more malleable, and he's more willing to go and say, okay, I give you this responsibility, but I expect this from you, and we'll try things your way, but and I think that's why I think him and Mac together were like an incredible combination, as strategic coach and veteran of the team, right? Because I think when we look at League of Legends teams, you always have to look at the relationship between coach and veteran, right? Like I think that you can talk about Faker's teams, but you always talk about Faker and Como, right? And I think that when you look at teams in Europe, often we don't think enough about the relationship between coach and veteran on the team. And I think that's, if you want to understand a team, you kind of have to understand a team through that lens, for working out why it functions the way that it does. But that's kind of how I look at teams from the outside.
Right. When the team became Mad Lions, which if people don't know is technically still the same parent company. It's Overactive Media that had Splyce before. It's a rebrand, right? But obviously this is the era when like it's LEC with franchise and all this jazz, right? Here's the question I have. You set it up perfectly. Because when Humanoid came in as Splyce, he was the rookie. They were all the more veteran players. And then after that, the next year, it's the opposite way around. He suddenly is, like you say, as a second year player, is the veteran. And then everyone else is a rookie. They're all players from the ERL. So the question is this, right? I remember at this particular time, dude, I can't remember if I specifically did, but I know a lot of people actually flamed this moves, because again, it looked like, remember, this is before a lot of the ERL players have had the success, so people really did think, right, okay, maybe there was like, Nemesis and Submit and Crowley and the odd player in the ERLs, but you're going too far now. You guys are just like, you're thinking you're going to find, Capses and these players out there. Like, when you made this roster with 4 rookies, like, and then it obviously went on to be very good, like it was right on the brink, it was a contender. Like, did you know going in, this is a gamble? Did you intentionally take a gamble? Did you want a lot of rookies specifically? Like, I don't know, maybe you wanted open-mindedness. I know that's what people like Aaron here always tell me is the benefit of the rookie. Like, what was the concept here? Because the difference with the Splyce roster is it's pretty, you can sort of guarantee some level of performance. You know how Kobbe is going to play, how Vizicachi will play. So was this a big gamble for you to make this lineup for 2020? It's
but I think also it was a case of kind of a changing of the guard. Right. So this was a, like, 2019. 2019 was a rough year. Like, I mean, we got to the quarterfinals of Worlds. I literally didn't even want to watch another game of League of Legends after 2019. Right. Like, I was so drained by the end of that year. I've only been this drained after a year once, which was, 2022 to 2023 off season for reasons.
Who could imagine that? I
know. But basically, like, I really, really didn't want to do anything, right? Like, I was like, okay, enough, right? I had 2 really fun years in Brazil, but if this is what League of Legends is like in Europe, fuck this. But I had a talk with Adam, who was he's the CEO of Overactive Media now, but he was he's a VP or like, right, I'm really, like senior management. I'm really bad with titles. And he basically said, give it 1 more year. we're going to build a rookie roster. We want to have a new, fresh start for because it's a new project. It's we start afresh, and this project I think was really decided in the off season. So in the 2019, so remember 2019, really dreadful year. I don't think anyone has positive memories of that year from Splyce. Okay, so Kobbe. So your team has been a Kobbe Xerxes team, right? That's basically what the team has been. Chachi's retiring. Kobbe has the TSM offer, which he's going to take. Norskeren was really built there to facilitate Kobbe and to facilitate Xerxes. He was like a piece for the team. So you have Humanoid and Xerxes. Okay, that off season, we went to talk to Xerxes and Xerxes and said, okay, we're going to reboot. Are you in or are you not? Right? And Humanoid was like, holy fuck, this sounds like insane. We're gonna go stomp everyone next split. Let's do it, right? And Xerxes was like, okay. And then that's kind of what Xerxes. So the funny thing is for Xerxes, I think Xerxes is a guy that does insanely well when he has rookies. I think he's like a really good person to lead rookies. But the types of rosters Xerxes wants to be on, he always wants to be on a safe roster. He doesn't necessarily want to be the star of the roster. So Xerxes really didn't want to do it. And he ended up going to Origin, and it didn't work out for him that well. But the point about all of this was that Humanoid was very interested in this type of a project. And basically, although he didn't insist on anyone in the roster, he kind of gave us some names that he was interested in working. Of those guys, Carzzy I think Carzzy was. I won't say who he named, right? But basically, Carzzy was really high on his list. And basically, I don't think we could have done what we did going into 2020 without Humanoid's buy-in. So Humanoid had. So firstly, you had Adam saying that he wanted to reboot. Secondly, you had a lot of people who were in the project either retiring or keen to move on. And thirdly, you had a potential leader of the team who was really keen to take up more responsibility and willing to lead a group of rookies. And we thought, as a coaching staff, that there were basically the ERLs hadn't properly been tapped yet, because a lot of people just hadn't gone into this, right? People must remember that this, it seems a bit unfair to shit on this guy, but this is a year after Betsy and certain other mid laner. You just look at the mid lane pool the year before, it was really obvious that people were not looking at the ERLs, because rookies were unfairly valued. So this is why this is why the decision was made to go in this direction. Was it a risk? Yes, but it was something that basically Mac was really keen to do, that Mad Lions were really keen to do, and the veteran on the team was really keen to do. So it didn't even have to work instantly in the first year. Obviously, it progressed much faster than anyone, including us, could have expected. We were anticipating competing for Worlds, but obviously in the first split, we were even in upper bracket finals because we beat G2 in the upper bracket. And then obviously ended up third place because we lost the two things. But yeah, so that's what I would say for this. But yeah, that off season was a very turbulent one. It's interesting because in that off season, I thought I would be retiring, so I wrote up. This is something that Mac reminded me of in a conversation like this offseason. He said that I still have the document that you wrote up for Mad Lions when you were going to leave into it. And he just showed me this 3-page document, which I don't even remember reading, but it's written in my style. It's very obvious that I've written it, but it was outlining all the different ways you can find success. And there was the New York Yankees approach, because we were writing for American audience, the New York Yankees approach, or the San Antonio Spurs approach, or I can't even remember what the third team was, right? And we were this is what works in this approach. This is the budget and things like this. And we talked about, and I think the approach was the San Antonio Spurs approach, which is the one that was taken, which is you have a coaching staff and a veteran, and you build around your veteran, which we compared to Tim Duncan, Humanoid, and then you have a coaching staff that functions around this, and then you put the pieces around it, and then you grow with your veteran and your coaching staff together. And that's essentially my responsibility in that year, was to oversee that and make sure that they were going in the right direction, with the intention that after that year I would leave. But I would say that 2019 was rough, but 2020 was such a fun year. I mean, like, coaching Carzzy. Okay, sidetrack on Carzzy. Okay, so Carzzy joined when he was 17. He just turned 17, and Carzzy was like a very mischievous person as 17. Like, the people think, oh, people act on social media. Nope, the way that Carzzy acts on social media is exactly how he behaves in real life. And the best example of this I can think of, like, one day he was obviously misbehaving. He was seeing what he could get away with, the coach, pushing the limits. And then, like, he'd done something which was obviously really, really bad. I can't even remember what the point was, okay? And I was, like, going to tell him off, and I was, like, being like, yeah, you can't do this. And he was like, what are you going to do about it? Like, in like a really, really joking, naughty way. Like, what are you going to do about it? Oh, you can't do anything. It's child abuse. I'll tell your mummy on you, or something like this, right? He had a really easy way of, I can't remember something like this. It's some ridiculous, over the top thing where he's behaving like a 10-year-old kid, 10-year-old brat, just to, like, diffuse tension from a situation where he's obviously in the wrong, right? As a 17-year-old, and, like, it was hilarious. He was literally one of the funniest people that I've ever met. But he would always push his limits. He would always see what he could get away with. And yeah, I mean, I would say that having him on the team, having, like, a Romeo on the team who was, like, the more, like, stable person, he very, like, a Romeo was like ranked number 2 at mathematics in Romania in his year or something, and had, like, a scholarship to the top university in Romania, like, full ride, before he went into esports, and chose to go to esports instead. But you had that contrast. You had, like, people from opposite ends of the spectrum combining together to create something which they would, like, have fun with each other. They would go out, they would joke together, they would, and it was just so fun. It was just, 2020, when people dream about going into esports to coach a team, that 2020 roster with all those rookies everyone was motivated, everyone was having fun, and there was no, like, there was a clear, like, hierarchy within the team, but it wasn't like you could never challenge it in a way, right? So those guys really, really meshed together really well. And, what I would say is, I think that the downfall of that roster is that Arome, because he's come out and said it publicly, and Shadow, because I think I can say it now because he's different now that he's in LPL, really, really struggled with nerfs. And that's why nobody wanted to pick those. Like, everyone wanted Carzzy, everyone wanted Kaiser. He was called Gistic at the time. But those two guys, but Arome and Shadow had this reputation as being chokers on stage. And basically, that year was really, really rough at the end of the year, because we had somebody called Jake. People may know him as, like, the Viking on Madlands, right? And he was brought into the team, and when Madlands were doing really, really well, he was a big part of this. He was doing those, like, sports psychologist, meetings that Humanoid was taking part of, and he did a lot to motivate. He did a lot to motivate the players in a really good way. Like, he had this routine with Shad. Like, he's this big, muscular guy, like Taekwondo or something like this, pro Taekwondo player before he retired due to injury. And he would, like, take Shadow in before a key game. This is during COVID, so we were in our office, and he would, like, drag him into a room, and there'd be no light. There'd just be a torch on his face, and he'd be, like, standing over Shadow, and he'd be like, they would have a mantra that was something like, "I've worked hard. I deserve to be here. I will support my team. I'm going to carry the game." And, like, they would do it, like, in increasing levels of intensity. And he would just, like, be incredibly, and he would come out of that room, like, he would go in nervous, and he would come out of this room, like, ready to go, and he'd be, like, believe he could carry anything and, like, stomp everyone into the floor. And Jake did such a good job with Shadow and Arome that the team, so in spring they did well, but they were a bit inexperienced, so Fnatic and G2 kind of exploited that in playoffs. But in summer, the team did super, super well until Jake got taken away. And Jake got, like, So they had like a Call of Duty issue with the Call of Duty team, and Jake was doing such a good job with the Mad Lions team that he was taken and put in the Call of Duty team.
Right.
And then you could see the cracks beginning, like the trajectory of the team is like this, and then you see cracks slowly begin to develop until like we almost didn't go to Worlds that year. And then of course the problem was that the two people who were kind of providing that reinforcement support, right? So Mac and Cass were on stage, were Jake and I, right? So Jake was supposed to go to Worlds that year, but he got an infection, which meant that he couldn't travel. And then at Worlds that year, we were in quarantine, and on the last day of quarantine, I literally slipped in the shower, and I sprained my leg to the point where I couldn't walk. So people talk about that 2020 Mad Lions. They choked in the play-ins, but that was a team that had the potential to do that. And the reason why we were able to put such a talented team together is because we understood that these were downsides of the players,
Right.
but we put things around them in order to make it work. But the two people who were supposed to provide that support were not available. Like I couldn't even go to, I literally couldn't leave my room. And I don't know if people know what the internet is like in China. If you're not on like special internet,
If you don't have the VPNs you're not supposed to have, it's dodgy as fuck. It goes down constantly. Doesn't it? Yes.
Like it was basically almost impossible to be a part of the team that year, and
Makes
I
sense.
think that ended up hurting the team. And I understand why they made the roster changes they did. But yeah, I think that's the thing that makes me the most sad about this, because people may have a very negative impression of a Rome or
Sure.
a negative impression of Shadow, especially from Worlds. Shadow
Yes.
that year at Worlds
Yes.
had a really, really rough time, but they don't understand that these guys were already struggling. And Shadow, he was the only mainland Chinese jungler at Worlds that year, because SOFM was there from Vietnam, and then there were 2 Korean junglers on the other 2 Chinese teams. So he was the only native Chinese. So the
Pressure must have been insane too, right?
pressure, and like when he had his first bad performance, the Chinese LPL broadcast did a greatest hits of Shadow, where they
like a
like
low-light
showed him
thing,
like,
right? I see.
and none of his teammates had Weibo or anything,
Right.
but like I did, and he was getting
I can imagine. They're brutal
And-
on there as well. They're brutal, mate.
They're brutal, and I wonder if Jake had been there, it would have been different.
Right.
But yeah, that was kind of 2020, and that was the project, and I think it was going well, but the problem was maybe we did too well too quickly. And I think that's also the responsibility of the head coach as well, right? Like, if I'm not making response clear to senior management, Jake is so important to this team. Like, don't do this. That's as well on me, right? So,
Sure.
so I think that was kind of the learning from that year, because I think we were too good too quickly. So.
By the way, since you brought it up, I actually do want to ask a question about Carzzy, and it goes like this. First of all, that's a great anecdote you give, because it aligns with one of my lenses for esports, which is I just noticed, I actually think it's not just about esports, it's about competition. I notice when people compete, their personality in the game, how they play, often mirrors who they are as a person outside of the game, and in often humorous and obvious ways once you see this lens. So when you said there that Carzzy outside of the game was always essentially like trying to push the limit of what he could get away with, dude, I think that's the perfect description of how he plays ADC. Because even though you might know I was fairly critical of him, not this year actually, he was pretty good this first year, but the middle years, the ones where it used to look like he inted all the time and he did the classic move, which everyone knows is my number one pet peeve of ADC, which is you could carry the whole fight, but you die too early on. You do the flash in and you die, which obviously, by the way, the joke is like, this is why I'm a complicated person. The joke is my boy Reckless would never do that, but then I don't like it when you're too much of a pussy. So this is why it's a nightmare to follow the League of Legends. So basically, I'll say this. I do think there was years where maybe he was a bit misaligned. The joke is, though, this is why the punchline, in the end, he gets the laugh on me, because in 2023, I actually think he plays the most appropriate style of ADC for a European. Like, the real joke is, if you, and by the way, even the same examples there, when you saw Reckless try to play Season 8 ADC in 2023, it didn't look great. Carzzy looked actually like an LPL ADC, dude. Like, some of his team fights are amazing, but it was this style, he's pushing the absolute limit. He's getting the absolute max damage out before he gets popped. So what do you say about Carzzy? Because like I say, it shows me there's more to this guy. He isn't just a one-note player, right?
So first thing I'll say about Carzzy is that the way Mad Lions built around him was very, very smart. So like the championship winning rosters that they had with Elyoya was the cleanup. It wasn't Carzzy that was playing the cleanup. Carzzy was the guy who was going in, forcing things. Sometimes he would die too early. But then Humanoid, they were using Humanoid and Elyoya to basically clean up the fights after he'd kind of play a bit like an assassinated carry. Right?
Yes.
So I think that was a very smart roster construction decision, right? To put Elyoya in kind of that environment, and I think Matt gets credit for that. I would say that. Well, I mean, I always mention the Carzzy story, which is that when I first came to Europe, I was scouting people for the roster, and I was watching Kasing play solo queue, and there was this guy who was just destroying him in lane. Like, I mean, he was playing Thresh, and like he just 1v2 killed them, like arcane shifting forwards over like Thresh hook, and like he just timing, and I was like, holy shit, who is this guy? I literally, because he wasn't on any of the lists, I was like, who is this? Just a random guy in solo queue? And I thought that this was like, actually, I thought this was a Forgiven Smurfs or something like this. Like, and I was like, who is he? And I found out later it was Carzzy. And from that point onwards, I was always like, okay, this is a guy that we need to follow. And the thing about him is he would always push his limits, and there's kind of two modes to Carzzy. I would say that actually, so Humanoid obviously was the primary shot caller, but he was kind of the guy who was making the final snap calls, right? So if there was a decision that needed to be made, this is 2020 Mad Lions, he would be the final one to make the call. But the guy who was doing the majority of the structure was Carzzy. So Carzzy would be like, okay, on mid wave, I want you to, we're going to contest this mid wave into Dragon, or let's play side into mid, or let's play mid into side, and then Humanoid would be the one to make the final snap call. He would either reinforce Carzzy's call or he would overrule him. But essentially, like the way that these two function, both inside of the game and outside of the game, was like incredible. And he was basically, and that's kind of what he was doing. He was always like providing. He was always providing comms, and he was always kind of involving himself in the comms. And this is a guy who he didn't show it. He always out to the outside world. He always liked to appear as this happy-go-lucky guy and things like this. But when he lost, he would get like,
oh right,
frustrated. But he would never show the frustration in front of his teammates. He would never like outwardly like you just have this like moment, like in an anime, where they've just lost like an important game, and you see the main character, they like clench their fist, and then they're like, the next scene he's like happy, good job guys, and things like this is really like what I would say about Carzzy. But what I would say about Carzzy is also he loves to play on the edge, but he needs his teammates to believe in him that this is the right way to play and that he should be playing like this, because that gives him the confidence to like push his limits. And I think if Carzzy is not pushing his limits, I think that takes away a lot of what makes him a good player, because he has some of the best snapshot decision making of like any player. Like, I
mean, when you said the Kobbe example, he must be one of the best at having the switch to when to go, right?
Ooh, yeah, but
is his switch just never turned off? Is that the problem? Right.
Yeah, like it's just I think Kobbe had a better switch, because Kobbe would play safer.
Right, fair enough then. Okay.
But once he'd made the switch, then he was better. Right? So the situation Carzzy wants is he wants to be asking like many, many questions and forcing you to respond, and you forcing him to make lots of decisions, right? And the way I think to beat Carzzy earlier in his career is just stall the game out and just make the game as boring as you literally could. And this is actually how I think he lost in the EU Masters that year, because he was semi-finalist in the EU Masters, I think. But basically the enemy team just didn't fight him. They just like stood there and wave cleared, and then he like played too aggressively, and then he lost, right? And then he like got caught in it. So I think that made it like I think that was what really made him stand out. But I think if you look at him compared to on Mad Lions versus on Vitality, right? Like on Mad Lions, he's only been with Mac as a coach, right? And then he had 2 years with Humanoid, and 1 year with clearly him and Hillisang clearly get on really, really well because they've both joined Vitality together. So like it's really telling that his best years have all been with Mac as a coach. And when he went to Vitality, like somebody who plays like this, like if Mac sees you play really aggressively in scrims and sees you run it down in scrims, Mac is never going to go, why the fuck are you running it down in scrims? Like stop running it down. Mac's going to say, what did you learn? What did you like? So we pushed our limits here. So we ran it down. What do we gain from this, right? What's the purpose of this? What but not in a like passive aggressive way, right? Like what do we learn? What do we adjust, right? Whereas most coaches won't behave like that, right? Most coaches, if they see you go 0-5 in lane,
tell you don't do it.
Like,
yeah, stop doing that, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Stop doing that, right? Like, and it's really obvious that that's what was going on in Vitality, right?
I think
like,
they sort of neutered him a bit when he was on the team.
Yeah, exactly. And
also,
you do that enough, and it causes your teammates to lose trust in you, right? Which has a knock-on effect. So to me, it's not surprising that Carzzy was good this year because a lot of people thought that Carzzy, that Carzzy was kind of washed after he went to Vitality. But to me, Carzzy is the type of guy who, if he's in a good team environment, he's going to be insane. But he needs to be in a good team environment, and he needs to be in a team environment where he can like be himself for better or worse, you know. And I don't mean inside the game; I mean outside the game too. So that's what I would say about Carzzy.
Right, obviously, at this point in the story is when we're now going to talk about some of the EG stuff and you leave the Mad Lions part. But I did have a final Mad Lions question. It goes like this, Peter, which is obviously people will now know the news that Mac himself is no longer in Mad Lions, even though he did have those many years, including winning the championship, going to Worlds all those times. And what I wanted to ask you was this. I mean, I noticed you saw my tweet about it. Like, dude, I think this is crazy. I understand there's all the shenanigans of off-season and what does the org want that. But if people don't know, like, I wanted to make my tweet mainly to fans because I wanted to let the fans know, like, here's the problem. When someone actually has success, you're going to then set the expectation that that's normal. They should win the championship many, many times. When someone goes to Worlds, the expectation then becomes you should make top 8 or you should do a deep run, right? The problem is, if you only look at that part, then you're going to say, right, aside from 2 splits, Max failed, doesn't he? Look at all these, like, playoff letdowns. Look at all the Worlds that have been shit. But all I would say is this, if you actually knew the inputs to the circuit of Mad Lions, as it were, like, they're not an org that ever had massive money. They were never the one winning the bidding war for some top player. Like when some of the names we're talking about, when people like Perks and stuff are available, they're never going to Mad Lions. That's not even on the table. Like the joke is they wouldn't even pick up the phone if that call happened. So already you're working with a budget. And then, like I say, the guy has won championships with these budgets. The guy consistently, by the way, I do these shows, Peter, where at the beginning of the split, we all do our rank, who's the top 10 teams or whatever. No one's ever put in Mad Lions top 3 in these, mate. Even when they win and go to Worlds. Like, I'll tell you, at the beginning of this year, I think with the original lineup, we had him like probably like 5th or something. The year before, they might have been 6th or 7th. Like, he's actually overperforming constantly with his lineups. And then not only is he doing it with budget as well, Peter, but as we've pointed out in this interview, dude, no one even rates half these players. Like, these are players that's like, who's that? And then they go on and become an all-pro player. Like, essentially, the point I made in my tweet, which is what I'm going to get to, look, it's a bit of a layup question, but I wanted to get your take on it, is, to me, it's like, if you look at that and go, that Mac guy wasn't a good coach, it's like, bro, if you know the inputs, he's a fucking magician. Like, how did he do that? Like, it's similar things for you in times in your career. Like, the people who know the score, it's like, actually, these guys are bringing insane value. Does it boggle your mind that kind of people, maybe they misunderstand him or they don't see who he is?
I mean, it bothers me a lot because I mean, like we talked about the humanoid thing, right? Nobody would touch humanoid, like,
yes.
like I mean, and we talked about the Arome Shadow thing. So obviously, you know, I think part of that is on maybe the coaching, but also it's partly on, you know, you can blame me a bit for that, right? For not fighting hard enough to retain Jake and things like this, right? At the key turn points in the season, but he picks up players that people don't rate. Like, obviously, there's some people he do, right? Like Carzzy and Kaiser, everyone knew were going to be good, right? But he finds people that are underrated. Then he finds ways to put them in a team environment that will help them succeed. And, like, to me, let me think about how much I can say this. To me, Mad Lions' budget is somewhere between 4th and 8th highest in the LEC, right? I'm not going to say where.
No, that's
but
fair.
It's yeah, okay. But, like, it's somewhere between 4th and 8th. I mean, use your common sense if people are watching this. But, like, he still manages to win titles. He's made them competitive. He's gone through several iterations of the roster where they've sold players.
Yes.
They've sold like star players.
Yep.
Like, I mean, do you think Humanoid went to Fnatic for free?
I heard it was an enormous deal. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, do you think that Kaiser or Carzzy, when they went to Vitality, went for free? No, right? Obviously not. So he's in a situation where he has to sell his best players or like.
By the way, if people don't know, he was going to actually have to sell El Yoya even. It just didn't end up happening. That was going to go to G2 or whatever, wasn't he? Like, exactly, yeah, all his stars go.
Yeah, and he still wins these titles. Like,
Yes.
it's crazy. Like, people are just like, oh, Mad Lions, right? Like, they should be doing more. But like the teams that they are losing to, even the Korean and the Chinese teams that they're losing to, have budgets which are like 5 times higher than Mad Lions. Like, I mean, what do you expect? Like, I mean, this is so, you know, I can see the disadvantages for wages to be made public, right? Because obviously, like, people will use that as a rod to beat up. Yeah, but if people could only see what these roster, like, I mean, holy moly! And to be honest, Mad Lions doing what they've done to Mac is like, I mean, I literally, I mean, I can understand it. It's a marketing move, right? But it is so. It just shows you the direction esports is going in, right? Like, I mean, this is a guy. He took you to 5 international competitions out of 6 in the 3 years he was there. Right? They went to every single international competition except one MSI. And you choose to kick him? Like, I mean, come on, man. Come on. Like, I mean, it's like he didn't even perform badly this year. Like, I mean, I mean, it's so unacceptable. But anyway, like, I mean, it's funny because the rumor is he's going to Vitality, and like, you know, Vitality. If he manages to find success with Vitality, you know, that will be another feather in his cap, because people have said that, you know, and I hope
it's supposed to be the most uncoachable team that never succeeds. So if anything, he's the perfect guy for the job, right? Yeah. I agree.
Yep. But yeah, like, obviously you have the insight. You have some insight. I don't know exactly how much you have, but like, yeah, I mean, like, I was really glad when you put that tweet out, because it means that, like, I don't have to tweet it myself.
No, luckily I do get the sense, at least behind the scenes, it's an open secret how good this guy is. Like, people who know, like they say, if people who know the budgets and how much the players costs, if you just knew that info alone, like you said, if this was like football, essentially, if you don't know, this guy's like when teams like Fulham and Leicester were like way higher than they ever should have been in the Premier League. Like, you just know the manager's amazing when that happens, because it has to be, because you know it ain't the bloody players. Like, they don't have the caps of the world in that team, do they? Like, you have to essentially find the caps, as it were.
And it's not even a one-off, right? Like, if it was a one-off, you can put it down to luck, right? But it was...
I agree. If you look at all the different rosters, we'll talk about, he's worked like 5 different rosters or something crazy, hasn't he? So yeah, I agree. I may not have the most supporters in the world, but the ones I do have are straight fire. And they include Matt Pugnaccio Rakula, Frisky, Ahmed Haju, Toucan, Tobias Bernasconi, Animosity, Tosh, Jensen Gore, and you know it always is a special thanks going out to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my show? Do you want to see things I say on my Discord, little piece of straight fire I drop in the Patreon only channels, stories I tell people in the other ones? Do you want to ask a question in my monthly AMA? Do you want teasers, find out who the next guests are for Reflections interviews? Maybe you want to be one of those people who takes part in the long form discussion with me, where we talk about whatever's on your mind in esports. Well, if any of those or more sound interesting, why not support me, put your money where your mouth is, and join the Illuminati today via the Patreon link in the description box below.